Nanaia Mahuta has faced repeated criticism of her lack of overseas travel since she was appointed Foreign Affairs Minister after the last election. I'm joined by NBR columnist Brigitte Morten. Often, actually, ministers get accused of being on the gravy train of travel. So.
Yeah, I think the Foreign Minister and probably the Trade Minister both get, a free pass as such on that. People want them to be out in the world, and particularly at the moment they want them to be out in the world because they want to see us reconnecting.
And Damien O'Connor isn't he? I mean, he's had quite a lot more trips. I mean, he's off again the end of this week, having only just got back from being over in Europe. So what is it about Nanaia Mahuta not travelling? Why isn't she?
Well, there doesn't seem to be any reason as to why she's not travelling.
Well, she is going to the Commonwealth Heads of Government. Yeah.
Indeed, but it does seem like that's a bit out after the fact, and the fact that, the Prime Minister is not going because she's going to NATO is, seems to be that she got, maybe told, maybe, said that she needs to go in her place. I think there's a lot of questions about why she hasn't travelled. Obviously, there's COVID, but a lot of foreign ministers have managed to travel, and Damien O'Connor has managed to travel where he can during that time. And also, restrictions have lifted in a lot of the countries in the last few months, and there doesn't seem to be sort of any jumping out of the starting blocks. As soon as she could go, has she gone?
Is it largely because she's local government minister and she's got this big workload of trying to get through what is a very contentious reform, the Three Waters, and really does that then question come back to the Prime Minister of saying, well, because normally when we've had a Foreign Affairs Minister, that's essentially been it. Foreign affairs is their thing and nothing really else.
Yeah, look, I think if you ask Winston Peters, that's no excuse. He was leading a party, some might say carrying the entire New Zealand First with him.
Well, with a court case going on at the moment.
Court case going in the background, managing to deal, and he did quite a lot of travel, was very popular, as I understand it, in the Pacific because he spent a lot of time there doing face-to-face meetings. And so he would say, no, that's no excuse. It's not the first time that, the Foreign Minister has had other stuff on their plate. But I do think you're right, that the Prime Minister perhaps needed to make a judgment that given that local government was going to be such a big reform piece this term for them, that perhaps they needed to separate that out.
And I mean, and there seems to be some concession around that in the sense that now Kieran McAnulty is going to have an associate role there and expected to take over some of that workload.
Yeah, perhaps there's a little bit of concession there. That might also be to the fact that he's a very sort of popular regional, provincial MP in the Wairarapa, and we know that Three Waters is very unpopular in those areas. So I think, there's probably a little bit of politics and a little bit of workload there.
What difference then has it made, or what's been the negative impact for us, for New Zealand, in terms of its foreign policy, given the minister hasn't been travelling that much?
So it's very hard to put sort of KPIs on our foreign, affairs portfolio. It's not like delivering this number of elective surgeries by this date or building this bridge, etc. But I think you start to see it with the absence of it. And the biggest issue that we're facing at the moment is the rise of China and their activities in the Pacific and our seemingly lack of engagement in that space, which has been really highlighted, I think, particularly by Australia's engagement in that space.
Yeah, but partly, though, isn't that also a reflection that Australia's engagement in the Pacific over a number of years has been terrible? It's its sort of image within the Pacific, it's arrogant colonial, whereas we have tended to have a much more, I guess, a sense that we do work alongside Pacific Island nations more in partnership. And so, in a sense, we don't have to do a catch-up.
We perhaps don't have to catch up, but now maybe we do need to do a catch-up because we haven't engaged in that peer-to-peer way over the last couple of ways, in that face-to-face way. And, I call on sort of former New Zealand diplomats and international relations commenters who know a lot about, what that sort of diplomatic space looks like, and they're all saying that there should have been more face-to-face meetings. So whilst we, Australia had been playing catch-up just before now, it does put us in a little bit of a vulnerability, and perhaps we're also now going to be on the back foot.
So you think Nanaia Mahuta should be booking her trip to Pacific while she's in Rwanda, I think, for the CHOGM meeting?
I think probably, before she even goes. I think without a doubt, you put in your international travel, proposals to Cabinet, at the beginning of the year. The Foreign Minister is given usually quite a lot of leeway to, miss more Cabinet meetings than most ministers and travel much more. I think, this should be just a back-to-back and making sure, therefore, that, she is catching up and, the government is not can bat off this criticism about what she's been doing for the last couple of years.
And because there was a sense that as an Indigenous Foreign Affairs Minister, and yes, Winston Peters was Maori, but Nanaia Mahuta really does carry that honestly. That would give actually a better effect to that relationship with the Pacific. And
Yeah, and I think it's not just in the Pacific, but it is about the fact that she does lead with her Indigenous values. She made that a really clear part of what, and who she would be as our foreign minister. And as a small country at the bottom of the Pacific, we do struggle at times at sort of cutting through some of those, what I call old boys networks of the geopolitical space, of sort of men in suits that have known each other for years and had those traditional relationships. So having sort of a different approach, cuts through a little bit of that. But unfortunately, there's been a lot of sort of discussion about that when she first came into the role, but it hasn't played out.
Brigitte Morten, thank you for your time.
Thank you.